Welcome to the third episode of Jim 1537's Metaphysical Tools for Transformation. Once again, I'm joined by my wife, Meremystic.
Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the concept of self-identity and perception. And this is a concept that's extremely important to our spiritual journey and who we are trying to become. So, Jim, I thought we would start out with talking a little bit about how self-identity and perception deal with who we are right now. Not who we're going to become in the future, but who we are right now.
That's a great question. I think that I would start this with talking about the concept of the I am. In other words, we could think of it in the sense of when we say I am, that from a spiritual perspective, we're invoking the God principle.
Right.
In other words, we're affirming who we are on a cosmic level, on a divine level. But all levels of I am, any level of I am, greatly shapes our identity now, who we are, how we perceive ourselves, and our ability to potentially transform our lives. So say if we listen to people's conversations, and most of us don't really stop and listen to what people are saying with a fine-tooth comb, although it's a good idea that we should from time to time to really get an idea of heightened perception. If you listen to people talk and you listen to what they say in the I am, we really get to know who they are. And the same thing with ourselves. The person who says, I am sick, they're helping to make themselves sick. They're identifying.
Miserable.
I am miserable. I'm happy. I'm broke. I'm strapped for cash. I'm lonely. I'm frustrated. I am blessed. It's amazing sometimes you hear people say, I am blessed. That's a great thing because they're affirming it. Or you hear other people say that I'm a loser. I never have anything go right. You know, the whole concept of the gamut from positive to negative and everything in between, that the I am principle on a cosmic level and on a day-by-day level hugely defines, our perspective of ourselves, which then in turn sets up our ability to deal with that self-perception and how we can transform our lives for the better.
And what role then does that play for us in our everyday life? I mean, it sounds like that you're talking that we can use this energy. We do, unknowingly, we use it. Mm-hmm. It's not like that we have to think about using it. We're doing it, obviously, is what you're saying every single day. So positive and negative, how does that play out in our everyday life?
I think what people don't realize is that the things that they're saying after I am are carving out their reality day by day, moment by moment. And certainly a person saying one time, I am sad, is probably not going to lead to them committing suicide or lead to them going into clinical depression. But think of the idea of somebody saying this over and over and over. So it's sort of the idea of the I am concept, and how we perceive ourselves in that realm helps to set up the reality day by day, week by week, year by year. It's almost as if that somebody had an easel and they're painting on it and they're painting a picture, and that picture will eventually manifest in actual reality. So the concept of our reinforcement of who we think we are, how we perceive ourselves to be, largely facilitated by I am and other words in that dimension where we just say, this is how I feel, this is what I'm going through, same kind of thing, but I am captures it so succinctly, and again spiritually deals with the God principle, that it helps to carve out our reality and shape it like as if we're shaping clay and shaping it into the image that we want, for better or worse. In this application, the laws of the universe are really neutral. And even though, of course, that there's so many other factors that we've touched on in other podcasts and that we will in future podcasts in terms of karma, past lives, lessons, etc., that if we just talk about how we're manifesting through our self-perception, how we're able to transform our lives, it's absolutely crucial.
So we are what we think.
Yes.
Okay. And that's a spiritual maxim. We know that. That's why we're so careful about our thoughts and about our words. But how does that play out for us in our everyday life? Let's not worry right now about how the I am and how we got there. to those identities, that sense of self-identity, or to that sense of expression. But how does that play out as far as who we are? Say, am I an optimist? Am I a pessimist? Am I confident? Am I arrogant?
Sure. And I think that all of those, perspectives of self-identity, self-perception, and the I am principle shape the overall character of who we are. And again, it's in a step-by-step way. And usually when you look at the big picture of a person, say if you look at a big passage of their life, their childhood, their adolescence, 10 years, 20 years, that you get sort of a really big body of creation, you could say. It's almost like an artist's body of work. Like if you looked at 20 films that they made, you'd get a real overall robust sense of that work. And I think when we look at the bigger passages of a person and how this concept plays itself out, it hugely defines us because it shapes us into being slanted, whether it's we're an optimist or a pessimist, or we're sad or we're happy. And I think oftentimes we find ourselves being conflicted. More than being in a box, that we find ourselves being dualistic and conflicted. So in other words, in one area of our life, we're horribly pessimistic. Okay, and that's built on, so many things, and we're not talking about how we got there, but let's say we perceive that we're a loser in love. And then in that area, we're very pessimistic, and we have that definition. And that definition helps us to be who we are and to carry it as a calling card in a sense. And then in another area, we might do well in our career. And so we would say, I'm successful. I make money. Okay, so we've established that and that sense of our identity. I think what really happens oftentimes is we're multifaceted, complex, and dualistic in terms of that identity. It's not just the simple I am, and then ta-da, there's the word, and it encompasses all of us. Of course, we'd all like to aspire toward that or think we could be that way, but that's a hard place to get. I think in application, it's more murky and more complex, but it ties into so many different aspects of the I am and the self-perception.
But how does that affect the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis? How does who we perceive ourselves to be affect those choices that we make day to day?
I think it sets it up. I think it hugely sets it up. In other words, I think a lot of times we look at things that happen, whether our choices or who we are, and we just look at that moment. Like say, I'm having a bad day, and we just look at that moment and that bad day, and we don't go any deeper. But everything is so interconnected, like the way an ocean is. Could you cut out a piece of an ocean and extract it and look at it? Well, of course you couldn't, and it even sounds absurd talking about it. But the idea of we isolate our choices and we just think, I did this because I was in a bad mood or because that's the way I felt. In reality, our self-perception sets up those choices. So if I'm a miserable person, then I'm going to maybe go into a depression, not do the things I need to do. Trudge along with the day, not really get things done. I'm a happy person. I'm going to sit there and I'm going to try and inspire others. I'm going to try and manifest something great. I'm going to try and be in service to the community. I am confused. Okay, that could set up the idea of making choices that are not good because the foundation of the way we're perceiving ourselves is not solid. So I think that the I am concept, our self-perception concept, hugely sets up the choices that we make. Because think of it, where do those choices come from? If we're going to take responsibility for ourselves spiritually and say, I've created this, and I don't mean that in a punitive or a judgmental way, where people could feel that from that statement, but the idea, okay, I've created this, then it means my self-perception is what's the guiding light here, that I really am, pardon the corny cliche, the captain of my own ship. I am really the one calling the shots here, even though it's very convenient and easy to look outside of ourselves. Well, that happened, I didn't have anything to do with it. This happened, I didn't have anything to do with it. But if we look at the reality within and basing it on our self-perception, who we see in the mirror, literally and metaphorically, it facilitates those choices and it propels us for better or worse, and I think in most applications in a complicated way, because part of our journey here on earth is to simplify and to become one and to become the I am God principle, right? But getting there is a real journey and involves a lot of struggle and a lot of lessons. So I think that most people's application of their choices, definitely based on their self-perception, meets with mixed results. Some good, some bad, some in between, some choices possessing both qualities within themselves.
Well, it's sort of like an iceberg, I think. That, they say with an iceberg, you only see the 1/10 that's above the surface. The bulk of the iceberg is under the ocean and is something that you don't see. You just see that little bit of ice that's floating on the top. And I think most people don't see how the words they've said, the choices they've made, all those things have created those sense of self-perception. But it seems like it would be horribly important. I know if I perceive myself as a diva, I'm sorry, I don't want to do the dishes.
Right. Right. And a diva should not have to be responsible for tedium and mundane things. But I think with the tip of the iceberg, that I think it's a great metaphor. And oftentimes those great metaphors are extremely simple, and we should never lose sight of the value of that simplicity, because we could look at the tip of the iceberg as the conscious mind. We could look at the mass underneath that we don't see as representing our various emotional bodies, some that we're consciously aware of, some that are suppressed, our ego and defense mechanisms, which serve to, oftentimes block us from what's actually in the subconscious mind at the bottom of the iceberg, all the way tied into the very core of what we've brought with us for the immeasurable and uncountable amount of lifetimes and choices we have led. All of those things, on a deep and profound level, factor into our self-perception. But if we're just dealing with it in the way that we understand it right now, like I perceive myself as a good person, or I'm a bad person, or I'm a good person, that we look at it that way, but all the things that are under the surface, which could be really staggering when we think of it, even in just its application, also affect our identity and our self-perception. So, of course, we're always peeling away the layers of the onion. We're always looking beneath the surface, because we have to reach the deeper correspondence to have ultimately the most healthy and profoundly productive sense of I am that we could.
How does that affect getting kind of, I guess I'd use the phrase, stuck in a perception? I know you've probably had the same experience that I've had many, many times. I've read for people, and they don't want to hear what you have to say.
Sure.
Because it's just like, no, this person is not this way. This cannot happen. They are so centered in their own perception of what the reality is that they can't be open to any other outcome except the one that they see.
It's so dangerous, and it's something that I think as a reader and a spiritual advisor, I've seen it more times than I can count, and it is very dangerous, because what happens is that we falsely perceive that things are static, whether for better or for worse, and physics will tell us that nothing in this universe is ever static, not even for a millisecond, but we get caught up into the illusion of perceiving things as being static. Now, that's always a not good thing, but it depends on how not good it is. Say, for example, when we're talking about people who get stuck in a perception, let's say if we're looking at it that I am meant to be with this man. Say a woman who I'm reading for is saying, I am meant to be with this man. And I could feel that they're not. It's not going to work. It's not even that it's working now. It's not one of those things that's going to happen. So being stuck in that perception is extremely dangerous, because it isn't just that we remain stagnant. That's an illusion as well. That, say, for example, when we're stuck, we oftentimes go downhill. Our perception of ourselves becomes worse. Our perception of ourselves becomes more negative, more imploded. And then when we don't get what we want, that we're so stuck on, we become resentful and bitter, oftentimes facilitated by perceiving ourselves as a victim. And we've both said this, that we've never seen a happy victim.
Never.
Right. So when anybody perceives themselves as a victim, they're not just sitting back and saying, I'm the victim, I'm sad. That leads to other things. It's like a cancer. And again, the illusion of stagnation is not real in the sense that we stand still. So we get stuck in a perception, but it actually makes things worse. So then the sense of being a victim leads to bitterness, and that leads to resentment, which causes usually a myriad of health problems, poverty, depression, and making that person really not enjoyable to interact with on a daily level. Once we see ourselves as a victim, we lash out, we get harsh, we get an attitude, that kind of thing. Now, conversely, that when we're stuck in even something that's overly optimistic, okay, it still has to evolve. Like we could get stuck in the idea that we look good, we're young, we're stuck there. Well, we're going to change. The body's going to change, or we're going to age, and it doesn't mean we have to look worse, quote unquote, but still things do play out and change and things evolve. I mean, everybody at some point gets some gray hair, one could say, right? So even stuck in that kind of optimism is dangerous. So I think the whole concept of being stuck with I am is always a not good thing. And it doesn't mean that it should be fleeting moment by moment. In other words, one day we can't say, I am a good person, the next day I'm a bad person, the next day I hate everybody, the next day I love everybody. Of course, that would be frivolous and absurd sounding, even on the surface when I say it. But the idea that we have a foundation of I am, but it is ever evolving, moving forward, and that will be largely tied into our spiritual journey, because we're always going to encounter change. And sometimes it's more subtle, and sometimes it's more dramatic. So, in a most mundane level, we could think that the I am concept in a good level could be the foundation of a house, but still it's going to evolve what comes on top of it, how we deal with the house, how we redecorate it, we might remodel it. So in other words, we are in this body for an entire lifetime, which means we've architected a personality which has certain limits
and flaws, possibly.
Absolutely flaws. Go ahead and answer.
But I mean the concept of our perceptions being flawed because they're skewed by, we can bring our karma into it at this point. That we've set it up to learn a certain karmic lesson, and in order to do that, it requires a certain perception or a certain point of view.
I think that's really profound, and let me comment on it. The idea that us being flawed, and that we're supposed to be flawed, I don't mean it in some sort of a quasi-feel-good, kumbaya kind of a way. That it is metaphysically necessary.
Right.
In other words, we cannot be born into a physical body unless we have darkness and light and lessons to learn. And so our flaws, which tie into our self-perceptions, have to be, in certain instances, wrong. They have to be wrong. Let me give you a simple example. Say, for example, to the I am concept, that a man meets a woman and he perceives at that moment, I am meant to be with this woman forever. This is it. I am meant to be with her forever. The reality karmically, though, is that he is meant to marry her and have 2 children with her and divorce her in, say, approximately 10 years, give or take. Okay, so he's going into this relationship from a delusional self-perception, which is not wrong, by the way. Okay, it's necessary. Because if he could say, I'm madly in love with her, but I'm only going to be with her for 10 years, and then we're going to divorce, he might not do it. Right. And he might not fulfill the karmic agreement that he has to bring these kids in, as we know that children and parents choose each other before a physical incarnation. Those ties are very profound and deep. And, of course, lesson-driven and all that. But say that kind of a concept. Now, let's say if another person had a lesson to learn of getting over depression, that they might perceive themselves falsely as, well, I'm a happy person. Everything's great. I'm always doing fine. They're in denial about their depression. But that denial may be necessary so that they can experience this, as opposed to knowing it 10 or 20 years before it happened and then dreading it and not being able to face it. So a lot of our self-perceptions are flawed, and some of them are flawed in a way that we need to work on because they're harming us, and others are necessary for our spiritual growth. So it isn't this concept of throw the baby with the bathwater out. All self-delusion is not bad from a spiritual perspective. And I realize self-delusion and denial have really derogatory connotations, but some of it is necessary, and that ties into our self-perception. So if we have a certain lesson to learn, we may perceive the situation completely from a false perspective and our role in it because we have to go through it.
Well, sometimes it's difficult to perceive. We use the words good or bad, positive or negative, and it's never, it seems, that clear cut. For instance, if you were a musician or an actor, you would need an overabundance of confidence in order to get through the difficulties that those kind of career fields hold.
And I think also ego. I mean, ego,
sure.
I've often said ego is a really ugly thing, whether it's my ego or anybody's ego. It's really ugly. I mean, if you think of what it would be like to have to deal with a narcissistic rock star day and night, it would be a really unpleasant and ugly experience to really deal with the reality of that. However, that it still serves a spiritual purpose. The ego helps to set up the lessons. So in other words, a lot of these qualities in the I am that are not great, quote unquote, are absolutely necessary. Like a boxer has to be cocky and full of himself to really do what he's here to do. A person who's here to be in service, and that they're here to just completely be in service to others, may have a sense of being self-effacing, may have a sense of feeling that they're not worthy. Because if they felt more worthy in their self-perception, what would they do? They'd gratify their own self-centered or selfish desires.
Instead of giving to others.
Which is maybe what they're here to do, right.
But it seems also that, we don't think about sometimes that there are concepts that we would normally think of as being good. Like, say, for example, being lucky. Most people perceive being lucky as a good thing. Mm-hmm. But it can also be something that you rely on too much.
Oh, I think luck is a double-edged sword. I think if we look at it spiritually, it's a very double-edged sword, and let's cover that. Okay, the good side of lucky. I mean, it's not actually luck. I mean,
it can be natural magic. It can be karmic. It can be
right. It could be that you're lucky to set up your lessons. It could be that you're lucky to get from point A to point B. I've written about that before, obviously. But here's the good side of luck. That luck obviously could make things happen for us. What we perceive as luck again. Things happen for us in a way that is really beneficial. Say, for example, if we have the ability to win money at the riverboat, and that luck is there. Okay, then that could be a great thing. I've known people who have had that ability through natural magic, the ability to be sort of a natural magician and to be able to win and just manifest. Okay, when it becomes a really bad thing, and I've seen it be catastrophic actually, is where the person is lucky and it inflates their ego and they become really arrogant. I'm golden. Everything goes my way. Then they become lazy, they become entitled, and they squander that luck. And just like the way that you have an equity line on their house, they cash it out. Or you have poker chips, they cash them out. And then the luck runs out and they crash in a really terrible way. So I think the idea that our perception of ourselves should never be attached to being lucky. And I hate to say never, like as if it's 100%, but I think it's a good rule of thumb, let's say, to not become overly attached to the I am lucky concept in such a way that we base our life around it. Like, say, I'm so lucky I'll pay my rent by winning the lottery. I'm so lucky that I don't really have to work hard at anything because everything will come my way, right? That kind of I am lucky is dangerous. So I feel that luck is something that does absolutely cut both ways, even though on the surface, from a non-metaphysical spiritual point of view, most people think of these certain buzzwords and they have very strong connotations. I'm lucky. Wow, that's great. And it needs to be looked at in a much more scrutinizing way from a spiritual perspective.
Absolutely. We've talked a lot about how our perceptions influence the decisions that we make. Let's talk a little bit about how other people's perceptions influence us.
They certainly do. And I think the concept of no man is an island, again, a cliche, but it takes on renewed meaning when we use it here. Okay, if we think of our lives being more like an ocean, where everything integrates together, which is much more spiritually accurate than seeing ourselves as separate and fragmented, because that's an illusion anyway. Okay, what other people do to us has a huge impact and effect on us, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse. Let's take one of the strongest karmic relationships, the parent and child relationship. So say there would presumably be agreements between parents and children. There's debts that are owed. There's things that are going to be attempted to be achieved in a physical incarnation. That doesn't mean that they will be achieved. In other words, that what we may have promised in our spiritual body may not be something that we live up to when we're here. So let's say if a parent was here to love and nurture their child, but they had a lesson to learn that, and that they had a tendency to want to be abusive to that child. They fall back on their lower self. They get caught up into the illusion that these negative emotions are real. They act on them. They impact the child horribly. They affect that child's perception of themselves in a negative way. So then they become a child who grows up to feel, I'm not worthy. I deserve to be abused. Now, granted, no one's going to consciously come out and say, hi, my name's Joe, I deserve to be abused, because people would consider them to be clinically mentally ill. But I'm saying if the emotional bodies are feeling that primarily, then they'll attract that. They'll make the choices that attract it. They'll manifest it. The I am principle goes into action. So that, say in that instance, we see that profound negative impact. And then in another sense, conversely, the positive. Let's say that there are two people who are supposed to come together and form a partnership to, say, do something revolutionary in business. And they both live up to their agreement, and they support each other, and they love each other, and the two of them together are better than they are as single pieces. Synergy. And they come together and help each other and reinforce that each one is capable and good, and they have each other's back. That hugely will impact on either person's sense of I am, their sense of self-identity, and ultimately help to transform them in a really profoundly positive way. So I think we're speaking of it in extremes, and then obviously oftentimes it's more in the middle, in that murky, muddy area, where how many of us have said, well, you know, this person, I really love them, and there's parts of them that I can't stand, and they've been good to me in one way and really horrible in another. I think that's oftentimes very typical, where there's this kind of murky and muddy blend of both positive and negative, but it shapes our perception of ourselves and the I am principle. Now, certainly, it doesn't 100% define us, because, again, who we are the captain of our own ships. How other people impact on us is important as well, and that varies depending on the nature of the karma, the relationship, and when that person impacted on you. Say a parent impacting on you when you're 4 years old is likely to be more profound than, say, somebody you work with when you're 35, where you already have a more formulated identity at your personality level.
What about people who are overly concerned with what people think, whether it's what the neighbors think? You know, do you have weeds in the front yard, or...
Oh my God, yeah, that's a good one, right? Like, say, the terror of what the neighbors would think. Well, I think that obviously it would depend in part on the lessons, but I think it's not usually a good thing. I mean, I think the idea of saying, if people disapprove of me, I'm worthless, is not good. And oftentimes we're so volatile about it and oversensitive that we can't see it clearly. I think what's important is to think of it in sequence. The first thing is to say, who is this person? In other words, a person who does not have your best intentions at heart. Like, let's say, a mean-spirited sibling who wants to see you fail. They have to be disregarded, or at least kept in perspective. Sort of that old cliche of consider the source.
Right.
Okay, a stranger who might think your lawn is too high should not be considered in terms of our self-perception. Or say if we happen to dress unusual for the neighborhood we live in. Let's say if we live in an upper-scale neighborhood and we dress thrift store and bohemian and maybe a little bit alternative-y and avant-garde, well then people are going to attack us and condemn us for the way that we look. That should be disregarded. So I think in terms of what other people think of us, I think it would be ludicrous to say that we shouldn't consider it or pretend that we won't be affected by it, but I think it has to be kept in perspective, and it starts with saying, not only who am I, but who is this other person saying this about me or commenting on me? Who are they, and what are their intentions, and what are their motives? Because unfortunately, a lot of people who are close to us do not have our best interests at heart.
We're almost out of time, but I want to touch on tools for transformation. Okay, if we want to change our self-perception, what can we use to do that?
Oh, we can go a little longer, right? That would be fine. I think that there's a lot of tools that we can do, and let's cover those. I think the first thing that we do is we can do affirmations. And the reason I start with affirmations is because we oftentimes can't control our thoughts or how we feel, but we can control our words. I mean, with a little bit of work, we can control our words. Now, if you listen to most people speak, they utter hundreds of destructive words all day long, whether talking about how they hate celebrities or how their life sucks or whatever. So it's ridiculous, and it's really expensive and awful, okay? But let's say the concept of even simple I am affirmations. I am at peace with my past. I am at peace with what other people think of me. I am centered and filled with love and light. I am in a state of harmony from head to toe. Okay, so we start with some of those affirmations. I think that's a good tool. Then I think it's the idea, too, that we can work with therapy, possibly, whether that's with a therapist or with a good self-help book. I think we could read books that help us to examine who we are. We could have a psychic reading with a credible reader, somebody who legitimately could help us to grow. The biggest advantage of a reading is giving us tools for transformation, not to just bark out predictions as if life is just a pre-written script. We can also consult with our friends who care for us and get their opinions. The people who love us will oftentimes have at least something worthwhile to offer. If their motive is to help us, something most likely will come good from it. And the idea of challenging our own self-perception by saying, this is how I feel now, but I need to relax those intense emotions to let God work through me. Because when our emotions get really intense and our ego gets really intense, we are not an open channel of receiving the information that our spirit guides and God are inputting to us all the time. It's sort of like trying to get through on a telephone that's off the hook. And so I think the idea of challenging our current I am perception to say, okay, I feel my life is horrible. I feel that there is nothing good that's ever going to happen. Ditch it. And sit there and say, I need to relax and surrender the burden. Another great affirmation is, I cast this burden to divine love and now go free to receive the solution that is for my highest good. And I think the idea of journaling can be helpful. The idea, too, of observing our lives as much as we can as opposed to acting out. In other words, I am at this state right now, but instead of just acting on our emotions,
stand back.
Stand back a little bit and observe and try and gain perspective. We win the war through day-by-day effort. We don't win the war through trying to hit the metaphorical grand slam home run at the end of the game. Okay, we win the war through trying to make small choices that lead to medium choices that lead to bigger choices, and through consistency and sincerity. And ultimately, an open mind is how we're going to heal our lives. And especially with an open mind, who we are, what we are, becomes I am God. Not I am miserable, I am awful. It becomes I am God. Not in an arrogant, egotistical way, in the way some people might take that statement. I am pure light and love. I am divine. I am connected to the God within. And that's what we should all aspire toward.
This has been fascinating.
Thank you.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yes, and I'd also like to talk about my first book, Why the Law of Attraction Isn't Working for You. If any of you would like to get it, it's available in an ebook format. You can get it on Amazon.com, on iTunes, Barnes & Noble, Smashwords, and literally wherever ebooks are sold. Also, if you'd like to have a private consultation with me, feel free to contact me at jim1537.com, and I really look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for being here with me.
Bye-bye, everybody.